Good evening. I'm Lisa Shoemate, Executive Director and General Manager of Houston Public Media.
And I'm Jeff Mosley, President and CEO of the Greater Houston Partnership.
On behalf of both of our organizations, welcome to this special edition of Red, White, and Blue, Conversations with the Candidates.
For the first time in Texas primary election history, the major candidates running for the United States Senate from both the Democratic and Republican parties will be on stage together, answering questions on issues that are important to you, the Texas voter.
Tonight's program is being televised live from the Melcher Center for Public Broadcasting at the University of Houston and is being broadcast on PBS and NPR stations statewide, as well as streamed live on the Texas Tribune website, texastribune.org.
Our audience consists of members from the Greater Houston Partnership, the Chamber of Commerce and Business advocate for our 10-county Houston region, and supporters of the University of Houston and Houston Public Media, a nonprofit organization comprised of KUHT, Houston PBS, KUHF, NPR in Houston, and KUHA Classical 91.7 FM.
Tonight's program is intended to give you all the information you need to make an educated and informed decision when you enter the voting booth on May 29th.
So, without further ado, let's start the conversation.
Live from the University of Houston's Melcher Center for Public Broadcasting, it's a special edition of Red, White, and Blue, Conversations with the Candidates. Now, here's your host, Ernie Manous.
Good evening, I'm Ernie Manous. Throughout tonight's conversation, we invite you, the audience, to join us through the use of social media. We encourage you to go online and join the discussion at either HoustonPBS.org or KUHF.org. To help jumpstart the conversation, we talked to Houston voters about what they thought were the most important issues in the race for the next U.S. Senator from Texas.
I'm a parent and I'm a citizen, and I think that healthcare reform is going to be one of the pivotal issues of our time.
Well, I think the most important issues here, particularly here in Houston and Texas, the broader Texas, is education. I think education is a key element of the future for not only the state but for the country.
From a state perspective, obviously we're always talking about immigration. I think it's always an issue.
Right now we have a slumping economy. We have world monetary issues, and we need to address that first.
The number one generator of jobs is small business, so I'd like small business to be on the top of the agenda for whoever runs for the U.S. Senate.
And here's how tonight's program is going to work. First, each candidate will be interviewed individually by KUHF's Laurie Johnson and Dave Failing. The candidate order for tonight's program was chosen at random. Following the individual interviews, all the candidates will gather on the stage to field questions submitted to us via social media and from our live studio audience. Laurie and Dave, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ernie. Good evening. I'm KUHF reporter Dave Failing. This is my colleague, Laurie Johnson.
It's our privilege to moderate tonight's conversations, and it's our duty to make sure the questions that matter to you, the voters, are asked.
Let's start the conversation with our first candidate for Senate. He's the current Lieutenant Governor of Texas, Republican David Dewhurst. David, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
It's a pleasure. Thank you all for inviting me.
I'm going to ask you the first question here. What should Washington be doing differently, if anything, right now to improve the economy for average American families?
Do we have an hour?
It might take that, but just a few minutes might do for the moment.
Washington is going in the wrong direction. If we don't change Washington, we're going to bankrupt the future of our children and our grandchildren. We need to create jobs. We need to create stability. And the way we do that, I think, is very similar to the Texas model that we all are familiar with, in which we've kept spending low. We've continually reduced our taxes. We've had the lightest regulatory hand possible, and we've encouraged businesses to come in. What's happening right now is we've got $2 trillion sitting on the sidelines, according to the Wall Street Journal. People aren't investing. People aren't investing because every other week we're getting new threats from this administration of a tax increase. We're seeing an avalanche of job-killing regulations. So to help the average hardworking worker in Texas, in which Texas has done well, but to create more jobs, We need, quite frankly, to send Barack Obama back to Chicago, get a good conservative Republican in the White House that will follow a stable, predictable course. Business craves predictability. I'm a lifelong conservative businessman, and business wants to make sure that the regulations, that rules don't change midstream. So if we can get Mitt Romney in the White House, 4 more Republicans in the United States Senate, create predictable policies so businesses know that the rug won't be pulled out from under their feet. We're going to see these $2 trillion plus $1.5 trillion with American companies abroad invested in creating millions and millions of new jobs, not just in Texas, but throughout the country, that will turn this country around.
Brief follow-up. It's great to be in Texas because we have an energy industry here. All 50 states don't have that benefit. Just say, well, it worked in Texas. You really can't say that's going to work in other states that weren't so fortunate during this recession to have that energy industry.
Well, Dave, that's true. We do have an energy sector, but other sectors have done well too. Our financial sector, we've seen a resurgence in our manufacturing now, particularly with our natural gas prices being so low. Governor Perry and I were down at Brazosport just 2 weeks ago, and Dow Chemical was announcing a $1.7 billion ethylene cracker. Other companies are looking at similar investments. Caterpillar just moved in. The reason people are coming, that businesses are moving to Texas, is because we've kept our spending low, we've cut taxes. I've cut taxes 51 times since 2007, and that's generated more revenue for the state. We've kept our regulatory hand as light as possible, and people want to come here. It's not because of the weather in August.
That's for sure.
Well, speaking of weather, that's the perfect segue. We've had a lot of unavoidable circumstances in our state. We had a massive hurricane almost 4 years ago with Hurricane Ike. We've had a record-breaking drought, massive wildfires. We've had tornadoes up in the Dallas area. One of the things Republicans preach is a message of smaller government, less federal involvement. But in cases like this, don't you want help from Washington? Don't you want to foster those relationships with the administration?
Yes, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you keep your strong local support. For instance, we wouldn't have been able to fight the wildfires in Bastrop County. I was there for the whole week. It was horrific. You had flames jumping over Highway 71, jumping over the Colorado River twice. Some 84% of all of our firefighters are volunteers. We need to keep a strong core of first responders here in Texas. And the only time we turned to Washington during those horrific fires was when we were asking Washington to issue a declaration so we could get heavy equipment that was sitting at Bergstrom Air Force Base. I was between August and late January, I was, in addition to being lieutenant governor, acting governor every Monday morning through almost every Saturday. And it took me 2 requests of the White House to get them to issue the declaration so we could get heavy equipment from Bergstrom, we could get it on site and save a lot of homes.
You know, as you mentioned, you'd like to get some more Republicans at the national level, but
Right.
At the state level, in the Texas Senate, as a leader there, you had to work with Democrats to get things done. If you went to Washington, how willing would you be to reach across the aisle to get things done?
Well, I'm always willing to work with anyone as long as they're willing to work with me. And I don't compromise my conservative principles. I'm a lifelong businessman. I have never been able in business to make my first offer and say, fine, great idea, let's do it. There's always been some back and forth, some negotiation. But I've never once compromised my company, Falcon Seaboard, that I built from scratch, built with nothing. And it's the same thing in politics. In reaching out, trying to get support, I've never once compromised. I have tried to appeal to the best angels of Democrats, in some cases Republicans, in order to get a majority, because the Texas Senate is the only legislative body like the U.S. Senate in which there's a number of senators you have to have in order to move forward.
I'd like to talk about immigration a little bit. Do you see the problem as being the illegal immigrant, the illegal worker, or do you see the problem being the onus of the company that hires that person? Should business owners more often be prosecuted for hiring illegal labor?
Well, I think it's both. First of all, well, it's actually three parties, not just two parties. The biggest culprit in this is our federal government. Our federal government has been an abject failure in securing our borders. I've been recommending for 3 years now that we ought to triple the size of our Border Patrol. We've got some 19,000 fine men and women in our Border Patrol for 2,000 miles on a southern border, 4,000 miles on a northern border. Don't forget, we've got a border between Alaska and Canada, 1,500 miles, all of Puerto Rico, and I'm guess estimating roughly 150 different ports of entry, 19,000. How many police officers do we have in New York City? 38,000 authorized, with traffic police probably 52,000. What's wrong with this picture? Is New York more important than the rest of the country? They probably think so, but I'm not sure that we do. Triple the size of the Border Patrol. We've been doing, over the last 6 years, surge operations with Texas dollars, Texas general revenue, not federal dollars, Texas dollars. And we've seen wherever we did a surge operation, nothing moved.
Well, how do you pay for that, though? Because you said in New York, you're talking about local officers there?
Uh-huh.
They got a lot of high taxes in New York. People don't like that. You brag in Texas, we have much lower, I'm sure, than in New York. How do you pay for all that on the border then?
Well, you see, that's my point. What we've been doing, we've been proving that it's people on the border. We've been doing surge operations. We've been paying for it out of our Texas budget. We've been paying for it out of general revenue. Third-party studies have shown that the cost of tripling the size of the Border Patrol would cost less than some of the third-party studies I've seen than what illegal immigration, dangerous drug trafficking, illegal children going into our schools, our prisons, cost the state of Texas, not to mention the other 49 states.
Talk about something in Texas which always has two sides to it. The high price of oil, which means the high prices at the gas pump. Obviously, high oil prices benefit our economy, but to every average person, it hits you in the pocketbook.
It does.
Is it disingenuous, though, to argue that politicians somehow have an effect on the price of oil and therefore the price we pay at the pump?
No. No, because supply and demand. Why is the price of natural gas down to $2.25? Because we've had such great luck, such great ability in unlocking natural gas from shale formations because of George Mitchell's discoveries years ago with hydrofracking. If we'd been able to, if this president hadn't played politics and hadn't appealed to his radical environmentalist base and had approved the Keystone Pipeline, we would have been bringing down almost 20% of that number that we need to have energy independence, instead of importing 5 to 6 million barrels a day from the Middle East, from an area in which there are countries that hate us. We would be on our way to energy independence. We also, in order to dramatically lower our gasoline price per gallon, our diesel price per gallon, we ought to be using more natural gas. The technology is there, and I've been pushing that.
Cheap and Pickens' idea to get all the trucks with some natural gas to run them.
Well, but those are the 18-wheelers on the highway. I'm talking about using it for cars, diesel, in vans and things.
Much wider use than certainly we have today then.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask you a little bit more of a lighthearted question, if I may. We used to, in the old days, say what's on your iPod, but we're kind of curious, what's on your smartphone? Have you downloaded any apps?
No, I haven't, but our most precious sweetheart little 8-year-old Carolyn has. And so I haven't gone back to see just what she has downloaded, but I need to do that.
So she plays with your phone more than you do?
She's the one that taught me there's an encrypting locking on my phone, because one day she was playing with so many and I said, give it back. And before I knew it, she had it locked up. But we've now solved the problem.
Do you feel that that's something that, do you feel ever out of touch with younger people? I know it happens to me all the time. It's like it's become part of their lives when you're younger, but with some of us who are not so young, we've had to adapt to all these things. How's it feel?
I'm learning every day.
Yeah.
I mean, being a dad is the greatest thing in the world. I'm married to the sweetest, most wonderful lady in the world, Tricia. Well, I've got a great family on both sides, both my family and her family. Little Carolyn has three cousins, almost all her age. So I have learned a lot of new things over the years.
We got 30 seconds. Why don't you like to tell us something we haven't asked you about that you think you wanted to get across in just about 20 seconds?
I'm running for the United States Senate because I'm concerned that if we don't change our policies in Washington, the American dream, and I've lived the American dream. I was born a poor boy. My dad was killed when I was 3. Isn't going to be a reality, and I can't accept that. And that's why I want to go to Washington to dramatically cut our spending, our taxes, and balance our budget. 2, repeal Obamacare, take the Texas model to Washington.
We'll have to cut it at that point.
All right,
Thank
we'll
you
come
so
back
much,
later.
Mr. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, throughout tonight's conversation, we invite you, the voters, to join us through the use of social media. We encourage you to go online and join the discussion at either HoustonPBS.org or KUHF.org.
So go online, join the conversation, and submit your questions for tonight's Senate candidates.
To make an informed decision, you have to know about the candidates, and that means doing your homework. We asked voters what they hope to learn about the candidates before they head to the polls.
The most important things that I think we learn about candidates throughout this process is a lot about their character, a lot about their family values, a lot about their history as well.
I want to get to know who these people are. I want to know about their positions. I don't want to hear sound bites. I want to hear more about what they are going to do on specific issues.
I think what I learned most about the candidates is how they respond under stress and how they handle the difficult issues in a public forum.
What are their underlying values? Like, who are they? So I feel more comfortable trusting them and trusting that they're going to make the best decisions for us as an electorate.
Born and raised in Texas, our next candidate says he learned the value of hard work baling hay on his grandfather's farm. Sean Hubbard brings a fresh perspective to this race. Here are Laurie and Dave with Democrat Sean Hubbard.
Mr. Hubbard, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
We got to ask the first obvious question, which is, how old are you?
I'm 31 years old. I'm older than Joe Biden was when he was sworn in as a senator. He was actually 29 when he got elected, not old enough to be sworn in.
You sound like you've been asked this before.
I get asked a few times, yes. And you know, by the time the election comes around, I will be the exact average age of a Texan, which is just over 32 years old.
I think you've done your research. I mean, that's the impression I'm getting.
Well, you know, one of the things you've been doing in your life outside of college has been working in small business. For a small business, I think it makes doors?
Yes, yeah.
Door
well, it didn't make doors, but we sold doors, built the frames for them and sold them to custom home builders.
So you know about small business. You've got a feel for that.
And in addition, my father owned a small hardware store until recently.
Well, what do you think about, so-called Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act? You hear a lot of small business owners say this will not be good for us, or will it? What do you think about it?
I support the Affordable Care Act. I think it could be improved a little bit. I think we'd be better off with a public option that people could buy into that would help control costs because of the competition. If there are issues that are harming small business, obviously we need to look at it and maybe bring in a group of small business owners and have a forum and discuss it in the Senate or with the president and address any issues that it may cause for small businesses.
What do you think Washington should be doing differently right now to improve the economy for average Americans?
I think we need to stop looking at it the wrong way. Right now, our economy is sick. But all we're doing is addressing the symptoms. We're not addressing the disease. What we have to do is address what's gone wrong with the economy, the banking system. We need to institute a banking reform that includes a modified version of the Glass-Steagall Act. We need to have bankruptcy reform that allows homeowners to write down the value of their home to its current value, to its current market value, which you're allowed to do currently on your second home, not your first home. I think we need to change that so average people could stay in their homes.
The cost of college these days apparently just went up. I just saw that UT Systems said they were going to be allowing some increases. The regents today just talked about that. Unaffordable, and yet the employers out there, and again, this may be something you came across, say we can't find enough skilled workers or educated workers with the right education. It sounds like a very bad trend if you're making it more unaffordable, and yet there's the demand out there for those people with that kind of education.
Yeah, and it's getting really difficult for people. My wife is 34 years old and still paying on her student loans. And so we know the cost of the cost of going to college right now. We know the cost of getting an education is very burdensome. I have a friend who's an attorney at a very large law firm. He works to pay his student loan. I think what we need to do is get more to a needs-based system where we college tuition is based on your income, your family income, and for those who can't afford it at all, get scholarships. And I think we should be doing near no interest on our student loans.
But in the grand scheme of things, you got to cut all different places. Is education where you still have to make cuts in the economic realities of where we are right now?
I think it should be the last place we make cuts. The message we're sending to our students right now is school doesn't matter. And your education doesn't matter. It's the most expendable thing we have because we always go directly to education when we have a budget shortfall. We have to change that if we are going to improve our schools.
One of the things we hear about most often in a tough economy is gas prices. And do you think it's intellectually dishonest for politicians to imply that they can affect the price at the pump?
Absolutely. I think unless there's a magic wand in the White House somewhere, I don't think the president can have a lot of effect on it. You know, the Republicans talk about drill more, drill more. I believe we have 5% of the world's oil reserves and use 25% of the world's oil. We can't drill enough to meet our demand. So I think it's very dishonest to say that.
That said, in the longer run, do you think that Texas is going to help America become truly energy independent at some point in the not too distant future?
Just on oil production?
Oil
No.
production, natural gas, all the things that are
There's things,
booming.
natural gas, wind energy. Texas has a great environment for wind energy. I'd like to see us expand that. So I think, yes, in the long run, if we invest in things like wind energy, we can definitely be a part of that.
Immigration. Who is it best to target? Do you target the illegal worker, arrest them with some of the raids we've seen in past years, or do you go after the people who own those businesses? And is that a better way, which has been done more recently, to actually bring criminal cases against owners of businesses that hire undocumented labor?
Well, as we've seen with the down economy, when there's a lack of demand for undocumented immigrant workers, we see a reduction in undocumented immigrants. So what we have to do is address the demand for it, which is coming from the businesses that want the cheap labor. So yes, I think we have to address it from that aspect. I don't know if I would go so far as to say criminal charges, but I'd say fines, and if they have a business license of some type, if they are repeat offenders, take that business license away.
But in Texas, how do you think this has been handled so far? Poorly?
I think it's been handled very poorly, and not just in Texas specifically, but across the country, because, like I said, we've been addressing it from the wrong end. We've been punishing the undocumented immigrants and sending them back, and they just keep coming. And my wife is an immigrant. I know why her family came here. They came here to make a better life. And now they came here legally. They came from Cambodia, but I know why immigrants come here, and it's to find work. Now, if they can't find work as undocumented immigrants, they'll stop coming that way. And so I think that's what we have to do.
Frankly, you're young.
Yes.
You're 31. Not many people have heard of you at this point, and your Democratic counterpart, Paul Sadler, has most of the major endorsements in this race.
Well, can I correct you on that? He has the endorsements within Austin.
Okay.
I have won nearly every endorsement outside of Austin.
All right. Well, let me ask you, why run for Senate at this time? Why are you doing it?
I'm glad you said that. I love that question. Right now, a lot of people are frustrated with Washington. And the problem is that our representatives in Washington, in particular in the Senate, don't understand how their legislation and the cuts they make affect the lives of an average person. I think it's time we get out the career politicians, get out the super wealthy, and put some people in there that know how that's going to affect the average American, average Texan. And I am the only candidate in this race that's not so far removed from that to understand what that's like.
I hear that a lot. We need real people in Washington, but the people who are in Washington started their career as a real person at one time.
Yes.
They weren't born politicians. No. So what makes you different?
Well, the amount of time I've been a big believer in term limits, and so I think the amount of time they've been there affects their judgment.
Talk more about Washington. You know, a lot of people complain about the partisanness of all this, and no one gets along, and they refuse to compromise on things, so nothing gets done. If you were sent to Washington, what would you compromise on, and what would you not want to compromise on?
That's a good question. What would I not want to compromise on? I'm willing to listen to ideas on almost any issue. I won't compromise on making Medicare a voucher system. I won't do that. But most issues, I'm willing to listen to ideas, and I know Medicare is a complicated problem, and I'm willing to sit down with Republicans and listen to what ideas they have, but I'm not going to just give all our seniors a voucher and tell them to find their own insurance.
Social Security, what do you do about that?
Social Security, what we have to do is find a way to keep our promise to our seniors, our current generations, while my generation figures out reform, because I think it's, insolvent is the wrong term, but 2033 is when it's going to start running into some issues, I believe is the date. And so we have to find a way, taxing all income the same might be a solution.
Do you feel like the hardline partisanship is part of the problem in Washington?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think also the influence of corporate PACs and lobbyists is a big reason. You know, they pay these people by campaign contributions to take a certain stand on the issue, or they sign a pledge. I won't sign any pledge before I go to Washington. And that's simply because I don't want to trap myself into saying I won't do something. Well, what if I get to Washington and that's the best thing for Texas, or that's the best thing for America? I don't want to be trapped into signing some pledge that I gave to Grover Norquist or someone like that, and then not be able to do the right thing once I get there.
The Bush tax cuts, so-called Bush tax cuts, would add another $3 trillion over the next decade to the national debt, I think according to the Congressional Budget Office. Republicans want to extend those cuts, and the Democrats want to extend only those that benefit the poor and the middle class. What should we do about the Bush tax cuts, extend or not?
You know, it's a tricky question right now with our precarious economic recovery. I think we should let them expire for those making more than $250,000 a year. At this point, I wouldn't favor going any lower than that, going to income brackets below that. If we are going to do that in the future, any tax increase must be tied to economic growth, such as indicators such as GDP or drop in the unemployment rate.
What's life on the campaign trail been like for you? This must be like a continuing education, given your background.
It's been great, yes. I had 1 week here recently where I drove 2,026 miles. In 6 days, I drove from Dallas to San Angelo to El Paso, Del Rio, Rio Grande City, Marble Falls, Waco, and back to Dallas.
So the price of gas is very important.
It's very important on this campaign. It's one of our biggest expenses. But I have a deal with my wife that when I'm home, I will take care of our 4-month-old daughter and do the night feedings. And when I'm on the road, I'll arrange for either my stepmother or my mother to come stay and take care of her.
What are you learning about Texas? What things you didn't know? You've lived here all your life,
yes,
correct?
Yes.
What are you learning, though, about Texas by driving all that
I'll tell you
mileage?
that the drive on I-10 as you get towards El Paso out there is a beautiful drive. I've learned that. And I've learned there's a whole lot more Democrats out there than people think they are.
Does that surprise you, that you had this impression?
Well, I had a theory that we were out there. I just figured somebody had to find them.
But you headed off into West Texas, a little apprehensive, and maybe thinking, who's going to come to the rallies?
Paul Sadler and I just spoke at a banquet out in Lubbock last Friday, and they had 250 or 300 Democrats there in Lubbock, Texas.
That was all 300. Right?
That might have been all 300.
But they got them out, though. Yeah.
They were there.
All right. Well, I think that about does it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate you coming in.